Dub Nation. Time for the real and inside story on Warriors basketball.
Curry sidestep, Curry drive, Curry flip, Curry good!
This is Just Dubs with John Dickinson.
We want to keep this show as interactive as possible. It's instant reaction. It's hearing from the fans. It's going inside the locker room.
On KNBR 104.5 and 6.8, streaming live at twitch.tv/thesportsleader.
Hey, what's up, everybody? Happy draft day. Welcome in. It's John Dickinson and Greg Silver here for KNBR, the sports leader. The Warriors are not currently on the clock. That much I can say. But this is our Just Dubs NBA Draft Special here on YouTube and tomorrow on KNBR from 6 to 9 p.m. It's John Dickinson. It's Greg Silver. We are with you here until further notice, basically, tonight, because we're on YouTube. And, Greg, we can do whatever the hell we want. The Charlotte Hornets have just made a pick in what might be the least relevant draft of my lifetime, and I'm over the age of 40. I'm over the age of 40, and this might be the least relevant draft of my lifetime. I cannot remember a draft with so few significant names, but the Warriors are not on the clock. Mike Dunleavy Jr. said a couple of days ago this might be the year to never be on the clock in the first round. The Warriors are picking at 52 tomorrow, but there are a whole lot of rumors on the table right now relating to the Golden State Warriors. So Greg Silver, welcome in, my man. Good to be with you. And we are with you until further notice tonight here for KNBR on YouTube and Twitch and all the KNBR socials.
Good to be with you, JD, but also great to be with our chat again. We haven't done a live one in quite a bit, so really cool to have everybody back. Shout out to Stunna.
Andis Brown. Andis Brown.
Yeah.
The MVP. Andis Brown. Yo. JD and Greg, what up, Andis Brown?
Look, going to your comment about least relevant draft, I think I'd have to say the same for me on paper because, there was the Anthony Bennett year, but you still got an all-time superstar and finals MVP in that draft, though. Giannis Antetokounmpo was in that draft. I see our guy Nathan here asking about the Warriors' first-round pick. This goes all the way back to 2019 in the Andre Iguodala trade to the Grizzlies, a team for which he never played. And if I'm not mistaken, was that pick again traded just about an hour ago from Portland to Washington?
Yes, it was. In one of the bigger deals, I thought, to this point in the afternoon, Portland gave away the Warriors pick, which they acquired, I think, through Memphis. And it goes all the way back to the Warriors, who got hard capped.
Boston between there.
Yeah, Boston between there, and the Warriors got hard capped on the whole Iguodala deal when Kevin Durant said, I'm heading out on June 30th of 2019. And the Warriors are like, well, hey, can you do a sign and trade? And Kevin Durant did the sign and trade, and it wound up with the Warriors getting D'Angelo Russell, but they were accepting a signed and traded player in a deal. And so that meant that they got hard capped and they had to send Andre Iguodala elsewhere. And so they sent him to Memphis, and that pick's made the round since then. That trade helped the Warriors win an NBA championship, by the way, Greg. But yes, the pick landed in Portland, who sent it to Washington as part of a deal which has been among, I would say, the highlights in terms of some of the big names of the early part of the afternoon. And there's been a lot of different things that have gone on over the course of the early part here of the afternoon as we get onto the evening that are not draft related specifically, but there have been a lot of different takes and trades and all of that. And Washington and Portland connected on one of them.
Yeah, they did. And speaking of Portland, it just was announced by Shams that Donovan Clingan, the center of UConn, will be selected with the number 7 overall pick. So the two UConn studs off the board now. Stephon Castle is joining Victor Wembanyama and the San Antonio Spurs. Now you got Clingan going to the Portland Trailblazers. So just a couple of the recognizable names. And by the time we get to 52, if the Warriors don't make any moves and just make their pick all the way then tomorrow, then I don't know what we're going to expect at this point.
Yeah, and let's let everybody know what's gone on and also what we're going to be doing here both tonight and tomorrow. The Wizards, earlier this afternoon, they reportedly have agreed to trade Denny Advia to the Portland Trailblazers in exchange for Malcolm Brogdon and that 14th pick, which the Warriors owned. It was their pick, but it really wasn't their pick because it was, top 4 protected, I think, but Portland had it. They got it through Memphis and Boston and all these other things that were going on. But Denny Advia was somebody that I thought Washington was going to hang on to. He's going to Portland. Malcolm Brogdon's going the other way. Brogdon officially is on the block, and the Wizards are going to pick with Portland's selection at number 14 overall. So that among the different things are breaking throughout the course of the afternoon. And my goodness, what an afternoon and morning it's been in terms of the Warriors. And you're right, Klingon is the pick for Portland at number 7. They had 7 and 14, which is a mirror of what the Warriors had back in 2021 when they took Jonathan Kuminga at 7 and Moses Moody at number 14 overall in the draft. But so much going on, Greg, earlier today in terms of breaking news and different things on the board. And I'm just going to run down a bunch of it. And you can let me know what hits you or what doesn't hit you. It's a pretty short list, but I think the big headlining news of the afternoon, and it really started in the morning, was the report from Brian Windhorst of ESPN and also Logan Murdoch of The Ringer. And it was the Warriors via Windhorst of ESPN prepared to trade for Paul George and offer him a full year max contract if they can get him. He wants the full year max contract, and the Warriors, per Windhorst sources, are prepared to give it to him. Are the Clippers really to that point at this time? We shall see, but that was the headlining topic as it relates to the Warriors. Then you've got Logan Murdoch saying the Warriors will ship Chris Paul and Andrew Wiggins out for just about anybody. They're shopping those two. We'll see how that plays out. I don't think anything related to a first-round pick is going to be bridged as far as that goes. And then the one tell as far as what maybe the Clippers are dealing with respect to the possible loss of Paul George would be DeMar DeRozan, who is in line to be a possible Paul George replacement if Paul George tells the Clippers he wants out. That via Casey Johnson of NBC Sports Chicago, that DeRozan could be a replacement for the Clippers if Paul George goes elsewhere. Warrior fans, at least a decent percentage of them, are hoping that means them. But there's a whole lot to sort through between now and then, as the Warriors are not going to be on the clock tonight, but could potentially be on the clock as far as making a move that could reshape the next 2 to 3 years of the franchise.
Yeah, well, there's a few things to get out of the way, and I know you've had 3 different 4-hour shows in the past few days, so if you still have enough energy for a Greg Silver, we'll find out about that. I might wear you down in the next hour and a half or so, but
I don't wear down.
He doesn't get tired. Okay, good. Because that's kind of what I need right now in my life. And here's the thing with the Paul George thing. I think it makes sense that the Warriors are trying to aggressively shop around a couple of players and look to make a big move. If you can somehow finesse a Paul George deal without getting rid of Jonathan Kuminga, that has to be like one of the best case scenarios possible, because this is not the Warriors of 2015. This is not the Oklahoma City of 2024, where things are good. You have a lot of capital. Your core is young. The future is bright. If you're the Warriors, the sun is setting right now on this nice little summer solstice, a couple days past golden hour, and you got to take advantage of it. So the frame of mind that I don't really get, and I know I'd be preaching to the choir if I'm just talking to you, but I'm going to be talking to YouTube, Twitch, KNBR, Twitter as a whole, and that is, it's hard for me to see it as realistic if you're in the camp of, I want to keep these young players because I see their potential, and the Warriors are going to compete for a championship while they have Steph Curry. I'm not saying that means you have to trade the young players, but let's just be realistic. Is Jonathan Kuminga going to be the second best player on a championship team this coming year or the year after? It's possible, but I would not throw my money that way at
Highly
all.
unlikely.
So to get a Paul George, yes, I know he's older. And if you could hold on to some of your young players, but not have them be your second, third, fourth best players, and instead be role players that continue to develop, and maybe your second best player is someone who's a little bit older, even if he's not the all-time long-term solution, or, I don't know if Paul George is worth a contract. Look, you got to go for some kind of risk here. Like, there's just no perfect solution with the timeline that the Warriors are on. And so they got to decide how big of a swing they want to take. And I think the fact that they're willing to take some swings, I think that counts for something.
I think it counts for everything at this particular point in time. And it shouldn't surprise anybody that the Warriors, Greg, are in on the potential of adding Paul George, even at 34, and even with the possibility of moving Kuminga, because let's be honest, as much as there is a certain faction of the Warriors front office that does not maybe want to move Jonathan Kuminga, the one thing that has been reported is the fact that they would be willing to trade him for an all-star or a potential all-NBA type player. And Paul George is right on the fringe of, yes, all-star, and also possibly all-NBA type player, at least when he's got that dog in him, which he doesn't always have that dog in him, which I think is one of the concerns, at least for me, about Paul George. I know we haven't spent a lot of time on Paul George, but in my previous radio life, as it relates to Paul George, I've spent quite a bit of time. I went out the night that Paul George was traded from Oklahoma City to the Clippers, and it was Kawhi and it was Paul George. And I said, I don't think they're ever going to win shit. And I'll say it, and we're on YouTube, so we can bleep it out or not, because I think Kawhi won his ring, and I think he's a selective engagement kind of a guy. And I think Paul George is probably best suited to be a number 3 in the perfect world. But for the Warriors, he would be their clear-cut number 2. I also think he has a tendency to be a PTO guy, which I don't love. Like, I've been as critical of Paul George as anybody. Like, that's where I'm coming from on this. That being said, if I'm the Warriors, I'd still make the move. And I'd include Kuminga in the move, and I'd look to go get him. And I would convince him that he has to play 70-plus games, and you need that dog in him. Paul George should be somebody that's absolutely on the Warriors' radar, without question.
Well, I also want to say this, in that we say the Warriors need a clear 2, with the weird caveat of Draymond is the defensive anchor, and he's the 1 on defense, but he's not a 2 on offense, but he still makes plays, and he's just this very unique play style kind of player. I think Paul George kind of can be a 3 in a certain sense of having that dog in them and rising to the occasion in big games, because you have a Draymond Green. Now, he's going to have to be the 2 offensively, taking a big shot, scoring, all of that, sure. But because of the unique attributes of a Draymond, Paul George doesn't have to be your number 2 in every single facet. And that's why I think this thing could actually work.
Yeah, I mean, look, Draymond can be the defender and the glue guy and all those types of things. But as far as a scorer and an offensive player and an option, I mean, Paul George would have to be the number 2, which, again, I don't think best suits him. But all of that being said, I don't think that negates the Warriors' willingness to do a deal, frankly, to acquire Paul George. Like, they need to go get the guy if they can possibly get the guy. And I'll say it, I said it earlier with John Lund on KNBR. If that means you have to include Jonathan Kuminga, then that means you have to include Jonathan Kuminga. And I know they're dangling Andrew Wiggins. I know they're dangling Chris Paul, but Chris Paul alone isn't going to be enough to do it. Andrew Wiggins alone isn't going to be enough to do it. So I think if you're the Clippers, whether Kuminga ends up with the Clippers or whether Kuminga ends up somewhere else and another player, maybe DeMar DeRozan winds up being somebody the Clippers would want to replace Paul George. If that ends up being the case, it all leads to the path where if you want PG-13, you're going to have to give up something to get him. And again, I think Jonathan Kuminga is the guy that would have to go in this particular scenario. And then we can figure out Klay Thompson, because I know you've got a lot of clips to be played as far as Mike Dunleavy Jr. in his press conference. We also heard from, and yes, thank you, Walter. I like it when JD cusses, only on the YouTube only shows. I know when I can be unfiltered. But we had Bob Myers. We had Bob bleeping Myers. That was I was trying to get I couldn't wet my whistle there. We had Bob Myers who had said, you might get Paul George, you might get Klay Thompson to come back, and it still might not be enough. And you know what? I agree with Bob Myers. It might still be enough. It might still not be enough, but that doesn't mean you don't attempt to go do it. I think the Warriors should be all in on Paul George.
Yeah, it might not mean anything. It might be a Clippers 2.0 when Paul George went to the Clippers. But as you and John Lund discussed earlier on the radio, yes, in hindsight, you would have loved to have kept Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, not gotten rid of that player when you saw what he ended up becoming. But at the same time, I still get why they did it. I'm not saying it wasn't a regrettable trade in hindsight, but it totally makes sense to me why they're like, let's go get Kawhi Leonard, who's not your true number one in terms of leadership and who comes to LA. Let's go get him with a player that's already established and could be his sidekick. And there was health. There was the Clippers curse. If anyone's been watching Clipped, I don't know about that or whatever you want to call it, but yeah, I get it. You didn't think Shai Gilgeous-Alexander was going to be this kind of player, and he certainly wasn't that player when Kawhi Leonard first came to LA. So I get it for the Warriors. Yeah, might totally fail, might not work. You might be in rebuild mode one way or another, but keep Jonathan Kuminga. Okay, get rid of him. Okay, still might be in rebuild mode. And I did see someone today online say, and this was a perspective that I can handle, was they would rather hold on to Kuminga and probably not win as many games. And I'm not saying that everyone agrees with that, but at least there was an acknowledgement of they care enough about the future of the team to where maybe they want to sacrifice what could be left of Steph.
Yeah, but you're not winning shit in that scenario. You know, if you hang on to Kuminga, and that's fine, you can continue to develop him. And I went deleted. I went edited scenes again for a second time here in the last 5 minutes. But the reality is, if Jonathan Kuminga isn't going to be the guy, then and he's somebody you want to keep around, then that's fine. But you're entering a mode of basically pseudo development. And if you're entering the mode of pseudo development, then that's fine. You can do that, but you aren't going to win a thing. And you're going to be basically a different version of the same as to what you've been the last 2 seasons. And look, here's where I keep coming back to on this. Even if you think, and I'm going to take the highest end that I've heard in terms of the highest realistic end that I've heard as it relates to Jonathan Kuminga. If you believe that Kuminga is going to be Jaylen Brown in 3 years, 2027, Jonathan Kuminga is going to be Jaylen Brown. Okay, great. So Jonathan Kuminga is Jaylen Brown, and you've seen what it takes around Jaylen Brown to be a championship contender. Not only this season, but last year and maybe even the year before when the Warriors knocked him out in the 2022 finals. So even if Jonathan Kuminga is Jaylen Brown, which I think is lofty, I think that's probably setting the bar a bridge too high between now and 3 years from now. But even if you believe it, like I'll give you the benefit of the doubt on that. Even if you believe it at this particular point in time that Jonathan Kuminga can be Jaylen Brown, think of the team that you have to have around him in an attempt to be a contender. Think of, you have to have another superstar who's basically better than him, maybe not in the playoffs, but in the regular season for sure, in Jason Tatum. And you got to have Derek White's and Drew Holiday's and Kristaps Porzingis's and Al Horford's and everybody else on that Celtics roster to be not only a championship contender or winner, but even to be in the conversation as the Celtics have been here these last couple of years. So it's no shade on Kuminga, but if Kuminga becomes Jaylen Brown and the rest of the Warriors team is a bunch of young guys who are trying to figure it out and are pretty good, but none of them are great, you're talking about Jonathan Kuminga's life-size, enhanced picture on the side of Chase Center, but a team that's going to win 28 games.
I don't mean to digress for just a moment, but did you think Zach Edey was going to be a top 10 pick? I wish I had our little breaking news chime available. Zach Edey just got picked 9 by the Grizzlies.
I didn't, but then I did, but then I didn't, and then I did, and then I didn't, and then I did again. So good for the Grizzlies. I think Zach Edey should have been maybe not picked that high, but picked high enough to where I don't know. I wasn't as down on Zach Edey as a lot of people were. I'll keep it simple.
I have one person in my life who I will keep their identity out of this for their own protection from Camp Zach Edey. But this said person during March Madness, when there was a graphic that said Zach the Great up on it, said person just responded back, Zach the Tall. Really was not a fan of anything. Just thought Zach Edey is very tall and therefore he can dominate D1 basketball.
Yeah, I think Edey's going to be a pro. I think he's going to be a 10-year pro. I don't know that he's going to be a superstar, but I think he's going to be a 10-year pro. And so I kind of like Zach Edey just as an NBA player, which I think
What makes you think like the differences between Zach Edey and like a Luka Garza? Because I'm thinking of another modern 7-footer that was great in college, but hasn't really stuck in the NBA all that much.
I don't know. I think Edey is. I think Edey honestly is more skilled. To be honest, I think he's more skilled. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, Garza's interesting. I mean, went to Iowa and all that. Like, I mean, Garza's interesting. I think Zaidi's just a little. I think he's a little more Zaidi. I said Zaidi, like Eddie, not Farhan Zaidi. Edey.
Don't get the whole chat to sign off right now.
Edey is more skilled than Garza, I think. But that's interesting. I mean, I never thought two thoughts about Garza. I thought about Edey in the sense that he was projected, I think, in a lot of places to be a late first, early second, maybe mid to even late second, or not drafted kind of a player. But this is the kind of draft where I think no holds barred in terms of, guys that you would have thought would have been 32 might end up being 8 or 9 or 10, somewhere in that range. And I think that's how this thing's playing out.
Well, to bring it back to our young players, the internal development and where the Warriors may be going with all of this in the next week or two, let's get to our first cut from Mike Dunleavy Jr. in his press conference. And this one talks about that internal development when Anthony Slater, I believe it was, asked him about paths to getting better in the short term. Here is what the GM had to say.
And I'm of the belief the internal development is. I'm a big player development guy. I think our younger players have a really big chance to grow and get better. Pods, JK, Trace, Moses, and then even our guys we've had here for a while can get better. I think that's got to be the main thing. And then from there, you look to see what else is out there and can you make a move or a couple moves or do some stuff that enhances your team. But if that's what's like the one thing we're hinging everything on, like it's so hard to make a trade now in the NBA. I think we got a lot of teams that are really smart. They know what they're doing. To make a good quality trade that benefits both sides, which is what everybody's looking for, is tough. And so we'll explore that stuff. A lot of conversations going on, but I don't want to get ahead of it and just say there's just going to be some big move that we're going to do and all that. Could be if it was there, great, but it's not something that must happen.
So I don't know if you guys were watching Mike Dunleavy Jr. I don't know if you were watching me and my yerba mate, or I don't know if you were watching our guy John Dickinson, but I was watching my co-host and I saw a little head shaking, just a slight little head shake through a lot of that.
Head shake, eye roll, whatever. Look, bro, and I'm talking to Mike. There was a lot of Gabe Kapler there for me. There's a lot of, trades are hard. Well, trades are hard. And John Lund said this. If trades are hard, then resign. Like if trades are too hard, then resign. And obviously I'm being a little bit over the top there, but the Boston Celtics are NBA champions because they weren't afraid to make trades. The Dallas Mavericks were in the NBA Finals because they weren't afraid to figure out a way to make trades, including a trade for somebody who wasn't on their roster that became their second best player in Kyrie Irving. And then they made a couple of trades on top of that. So you got to be willing to make trades. I already hated the player development component. Like, that ain't it. The Warriors are not winning shit based on their player development of the young players. They're not. Unless Jonathan Kuminga is turning into a superstar this season, I'm going to give on that. And you can mark the tape on this, Greg, because I know you will. If Jonathan Kuminga turns into a superstar this year and the Warriors hang on to him, then at that point, okay, we can come back and go, okay, they should have hung on to him, and he wound up being their second best player. If he winds up being their second best player, that's awesome. But if he doesn't wind up being their second best player, then it's a matter of who can you get to become your second best player. And so that's where I'm like, I don't want to hear how hard it is to come up with a trade. That's the best means to be able to get better moving forward is to be able to make a trade.
And also, when's the next time you're going to have a Steph Curry walk through the doors of your franchise? It's like never going to happen again.
100%.
So I get what you're saying there. I mean, yeah, and I'll say this. If there's a world in which the Warriors could get a Paul George or some kind of second best player and somehow hold on to Jonathan Kuminga, if Kuminga can be your third best player, I think he's going to have a really, really good year. I do, because we are a pair that somehow gets labeled as the Kuminga hate train, which I don't know. I really don't hate the guy at all, but so be it. But I just don't think in 2024, he's the second best player on a contending team. That's not unfair to say. He's 21 years old and his future is bright. In fact, I think he's the only one of the four, if we're talking Moody, Trace Jackson Davis, and Podziemski, who could be more than a role player in the NBA. But
without a doubt.
Yeah, he absolutely can be that. I am not saying that is not the case. He has some moments of being awesome. He has some moments of clearly being young and needing to work on things. And I'm glad this last year he got more playing time to be able to work through some of those mistakes. I think he and Steve Kerr had some rocky bumps at some points, and that was well documented, but they were able to get back on the same page. But if you look at this team, and let's say they do some sort of version of running it back, with or without Klay Thompson, well, that's a team that's both too old and too young. Draymond Green wasn't available. He's getting older. Steph Curry was clearly tired at the last month of the last season after playing way more games than you can expect a 36-year-old to play. And you look at the play-in game, Trace Jackson Davis was not ready to start the five. Podziemski was okay. Moody was actually pretty good as, a role player. And Jonathan Kuminga had one good quarter and otherwise was ineffective too. So they're too old and too young with the way it stands right now.
No question. And look, I get it. And Logan Murdoch reported this of the Ringer that the Warriors are aggressively shopping Chris Paul and Andrew Wiggins. But look, every team does this, Greg. Every team tries to, and it's one of my biggest frustrations in sports, when teams try to shop the guys that they don't like. When they try to shop the guys that basically, hey, we want these guys can't play us anymore. Or these guys are the biggest disappointments, or these guys are the guys we don't feel we can count on anymore. We're going to try to shop them and make a deal and take players back. And so I understand why that would be the first priority. But at the same time, you're only getting a problem for a problem if you look to do that. And so I come back to something that Tom Tolbert has said within the last couple of days here on KNBR. I come back to something that I reiterated earlier today when I was on with John Lund. If the Warriors are going to get anybody of consequence, they're going to probably have to include Jonathan Kuminga in the deal. If they can't, great. If they can get a deal done without doing that, awesome. I think all the better for the Warriors, but they can't be completely against that. And the one thing that leads me to believe that they wouldn't necessarily be completely against that is the fact that it has been reported at different junctures that they would be willing to move Kuminga if it's going to be for an all-star. Now, there's no age appropriated, metric added to the type of all-star that they would maybe get. Jimmy Butler. I don't think Jimmy Butler's probably going anywhere, especially considering the reports of this afternoon that he's willing to play it out on the last year of his deal with Miami. So I think that in a way eliminates Miami from the conversation as far as a potential trade partner. But this Paul George thing is something that I think is going to have to be, continued to be monitored over the next couple of days. And if you're going to get Paul George, Jonathan Kuminga is probably going to have to be going somewhere. And so I think, there's the potential for, whether it's to the Clippers specifically or to Chicago. I know there's been reports about DeRozan maybe being involved in, being a possible replacement for Paul George. It all relates back to, if you want to get significantly better, you have to add somebody that's capable of being the number 2 player on your team these next 2 years. Paul George fits that void. And if Paul George fits that and fills that void, then that means that Jonathan Kuminga may potentially have to be on the move.
I also want to add this bit of context in, because I don't know if you and John Lund got super deep into this. I know it was brought up briefly in one of the segments, but let's just calm down on the money thing for a moment, because Chris Paul is probably not coming back in some form. Klay Thompson may or may not resign. I don't think he's going to resign for a crazy amount of money if he is able to come back. And if Paul George gets signed to a 4-year max contract, I know that we both think on paper that's probably too much. Like, you understand you're taking a risk in the Paul George thing, and if that means you pay him for more years and more money than you would like to in a perfect world, comes with the territory of taking a risk. But the reason I'm bringing this up too is because Paul George at the age of 34, 35, and that money, you still would have to pay Jonathan Kuminga at some point coming up. And our guy No Cap in the chat here is talking about you pay Jonathan Kuminga 20 to 30 million. And if you deal him, say now, you would avoid the deadline of paying Kuminga a massive extension. Now, that wouldn't have to happen right now, but he's eligible for that in October, I think it is.
Wait, yeah, Kuminga's eligible at any point between now and October to sign an extension. And I think he's going to want anywhere between 100 and probably $130 million in terms of salary after this season, where he's making about $9 million through the next 4 seasons following this season. So it would be, hey, Jonathan Kuminga signs a 4-year, let's just say between $120 and $130 million, but that contract would go into play in the 25-26 season after he makes his $9 million essentially for 24-25.
Right. And so my point is, one way or another, Kuminga or older player, you're going to be throwing a lot of money somewhere.
You are. No, there's no question. And that's the thing. It's a matter of, do you want to attach Kuminga to that now and possibly get Paul George with others? Because Paul George is making $48.8 million next year. So Chris Paul, if he's part of it, plus Kuminga, that's still not enough to get the deal done. You're going to have to throw somebody else in, if it's GP2, if it's Looney, if it's future first round picks. I mean, that's not going to be enough to get the job done alone to bring Paul George over. And then you're going to have to sign Paul George to a contract extension, which, I mean, that's the part where I would gulp. That's the part where I would say, oh my gosh, a max extension on Paul George, who's already making 48.8, and it's going to go to like 52 and 56 and 60 and like 64. I'm roughly estimating there. Like, that's the part where I would go, I don't know if that is really going to be worth it. But at the same time, I don't think you can really truly worry about 27, 28, 28, 29 at the expense of trying to maximize what you can be in 24, 25 and 25, 26. I would still do it at this point. I think you've got Stephen Curry, who's still a capable future Hall of Famer playing at an extremely high level. Klay Thompson proved that he's not capable of being the second best player on a team that can win a round or win a couple of rounds. So go try to find a guy that possibly can be that guy. Again, I've never been the biggest Paul George guy. I've always questioned whether Paul George, Greg, can be a number 2 even on a title contending team, not a number 1. I think that's well been decided. He can't be the number 1 on a title contending team. I've questioned, and I did this when he went to the Clippers, whether he could even be a number 2. And part of the reason why is the fact that I think at times he's been a little bit too much of a PTO guy. He's been a little bit too much of, and not last year, he played 74 games, but the Warriors would need him to be that guy. And I think he was one of a handful of players who, because of the new rules in terms of postseason awards and having to play 65 games and that whole minimum, I think Paul George was somebody that under the old rules, he wouldn't have sniffed 65. Under the new rules, he gets to 74. So I think those rules actually played a role in the Clippers maximizing more out of Paul George than they previously had been able to. So I'm not even the biggest Paul George guy in the world, Greg, but at the same time, I still think I would do the deal because I think Paul George is still clear-cut the best possible option that the Warriors can get as far as an attainable all-star to join their roster to where you wouldn't necessarily have to give up a ton to get him. And I don't consider Kuminga to be a ton to get him in addition to the salary matching and the potential first-round picks. I get why it's reported from Brian Windhorst that the Warriors would be significantly interested in Paul George and in trying to consummate some kind of a deal like that.
Well, on the load management front, it was funny when they made that rule this last offseason, and in a lot of the posts that stated that rule, there would be a picture of Kawhi Leonard and Paul George. Like, it was not a secret as to some of the players that were being looked at when you made the load management rule. And then Paul George did play 74 games, and it was awesome. And that's an exact conversation I had with my brother and kind of laughing about the memes of that rule. And then when the Clippers were red hot for 2 months, we're like, hey, it turns out when they're forced to play their guys and not just rest them, they're a pretty good team. They got good players. I do think Paul George could be a number 2 on a championship team. I actually do. I think he has shown some flashes of making big shots in the playoffs. I think he had actually a couple of pretty big moments in the series they lost in the first round without Kawhi Leonard against Dallas. And this is a little bit of a romantic in me. I think this is where Warriors organizational culture still works in their favor if you get a guy like Paul George, because Steph Curry, Draymond Green, Steve Kerr, yeah, they're all a little bit farther along in this whole thing. The players themselves are aging and the ones that have really gone through the ringer to get this done. But the culture, I think, has actually worked. And I think that was a big part of what got Brandon Podziemski to be first team all rookie this year. Like, that's someone that seemed to really buy in. We never called him a great defender, but we called him a really willing defender. And we know that that's the kind of player Steve Kerr was going to want to give minutes. And he ended up getting a lot more minutes than Moses Moody, at times Jonathan Kuminga too. And that frustrated people to varying degrees. But my point is, I think the culture factor, yeah, they were a 10 seed last year. They didn't make the playoffs. I still think there's a winning culture in that building. So if Paul George ends up coming through these doors, I think that's where that PTO part you're mentioning, I think that's where someone like Draymond, or even in a quieter way, Steph or Steve Kerr, is like, hey, dude, are you hurt or are you injured?
Yeah, we'll see. I don't know that I necessarily agree with you on that, because the Warriors have always been on the fringe of trying to protect players that may be dealing with a little bit of something. Like, I think they've always kind of given the benefit of the doubt to, oh, you're dealing with something, take a game off, take a couple games off. And I think Paul George has been ingrained in that as his mentality. Like, if you're going to go get Paul George, you're going to get Paul George because you want him to play 70, and because you want Steph Curry rather to play 70 himself again. Now, that being said, the Warriors have said they don't want Steph Curry to play 70 again. But the reality there is, well, how do you make it through the regular season and put yourself in a position where you can be good enough to make a run, even if you don't have a top flight high end seed to be able to get the job done at that point and be able to keep everybody healthy, but also win enough games to where you're not in this dreck, as I said today with John Lund on Papa and Lund on KNBR. You don't want to be in that dreck where you're 7, 8, 9, 10, or 11 and trying to get to 10. And so I think, that's the scenario that the Warriors need to find themselves away from if they possibly can. I don't know that I don't know if the Warriors make Paul George more apt to want to have that dog in him necessarily, but all of that being said, and I've mentioned this a few times, I would still do the deal because he gives them the best chance at having a guy who could be a clear-cut number 2 and moving forward and giving the Warriors an opportunity to make that run to at least get into the top 6, if not the top 4, and have the ability to contend as a team in the Western Conference here at a similar level to that of, let's say, what Dallas was able to do last year and moving toward this year.
Well, I do want to play another Dunleavy cut just because it kind of relates to a lot of this, and we don't need to do a full-on reaction to it unless there's something in here that you feel like is worth unpacking. But it just kind of goes with the same theme before we kind of move to maybe some Clay conversations, some league parity, some wider NBA news and reports that are coming out, like Jimmy Butler you mentioned. So this is what Dunleavy had to say on the young players and believing that they can contribute to winning now.
I mean, we really value those guys. We've drafted them. We've grown them. They played really well. We're excited about them. So, the scenario to move them would take a lot. It's important for us to, be good now and then be good also in the future. But, the main thing is we think those guys can contribute and help our group now. If that was not the case, then we'd be more open to stuff, but it is, and so we're excited for those guys' growth this year, and I expect them to be with us.
Look, I think every one of the Warriors' young players, from Jonathan Kuminga to Brandon Pajemski to Moses Moody to Trace Jackson Davis, I think all 4 of those guys specifically have the ability to help the Warriors as role players in the 2024-2025 season. I don't think there's any doubt about that. But what's your ceiling with that team, especially as we try to figure out whether Klay Thompson's going to be coming back or not for the 2024-25 season? It gets back to the whole different version of the same conversation. And it gets back to the whole, player development, I think, is the best way to improve your team, which Mike Dunleavy Jr. said on Monday in his pre-draft press conference. Maybe if you had 0 expectations to get back to a championship level of play, that could be your level for where you want everything to be. But that's not the case because you're the Golden State freaking Warriors and you've won 4 championships and you still have Steph Curry. So I get, Greg, where the Warriors are at. And it's not an indictment against any of their young players. Again, I think all 4 of them could be capable role players for the Warriors this season and through the next couple of seasons. But the reality is the rest of the roster isn't going to be good enough to allow those guys to be role players and allow this team to contend, which means you have to take a little bit away from the youth to try and add to the core group or the big time money level players that enhance your chances to win championships in the NBA to be at a greater level.
Yeah, and I mean, if we just look at each one individually, I think Kuminga has the chance to make the biggest leap to being on the hierarchy of important players. I think Trace Jackson Davis provides certain elements of his game that the rest of the roster doesn't necessarily have, and that's why he found himself getting so many minutes and in the starting lineup late in the season last year. We're talking about playing above the rim, blocking shots, a little more of a paint presence. I mean, he and Kuminga are both lob threats. Moody is a we'll see. I do think they either need to find a role for him or get him elsewhere, because it isn't fair to just kind of keep tugging him back and forth. But, they came out and said specifically what parts of Moody's game they want improved going into next season. And Podziemski certainly can contribute, but I think his question mark is more, okay, it's like, to what extent? He was part of a lot of winning lineups, but is he going to be anything more than your fifth or sixth most important players at his best?
Well, it's interesting because I was looking at the comments as you were saying that, and our buddy NoCap757 writes, looking at what the Nets got back for Bridges last night, the Warriors run it back. I'd rather they trade Steph and everyone else. Like, what? Like, what are we talking about? Like, what are we talking about right now? I mean, it took they got 4 first-round picks and some pick swaps and some other things for Mikal Bridges. My biggest takeaway off of that, Greg, not to get off on a tangent, because I know we were talking about the Warriors young players, and I do want to come back to that. But to me, the biggest takeaway from the Nets trade is the fact that you have a guy in Mikal Bridges who hadn't been an all-star at this point in his NBA career, and he still netted 4 first-round picks. It tells you what you have to be willing to do for the most part to make a trade for a player of consequence that's still on the younger side of his prime to be able to acquire that player. And even then, it's a player that's not conceivably an all-star caliber player, Greg.
Yeah, I mean, that's a fair point. And you brought up on our last Just Dubs in the analogy of the Alex Caruso trade, pointing out that Josh Giddey was the 6th overall pick in the 2021 draft when the Warriors had picks 7 and 14, and they traded away Josh Giddey to get a really quality role player. So that doesn't mean that they'd have to do the same kind of model with Jonathan Kuminga, but I think it was more you making the point of, hey, sometimes this is what it takes to make a sacrifice when you're looking at how to help your team, even though Oklahoma City is obviously in a much more comfortable position here in 2024 than the Golden State Warriors are.
Yeah. And look, I think when you get into the pick swaps, and NoCap says this, I mean, it could be as high as 5 first-round picks when you look at projecting everything else as far as what was there. Andis Brown in the YouTube chat, they cannot run it back. There will be rioting at Chase. You believe that, Greg? I don't know. I think there's a decent chunk of the fan base that if they run it back, they're going to be happy because there's a delusional belief in some of the young players. I know you were touching on that before I got into the tangent of the YouTube chat. Because it caught my eye. I mean, you were talking. I think there's some that think, "Hey, run it back. Yeah, the young guys keep getting better player development. Let's go." But then I think there are others who are like, "No, this is the one last chance in many ways to build something a little bit more veteran around Stephen Curry, and the Warriors better take the opportunity to move forward down that path."
I got 2 things for you. One, addressing that comment. I don't think there would be a lot of rioting. I think people are very protective over the young players. I'm not saying it makes them right or wrong, but I think we've seen, just working in the media and kind of paying attention to the Warriors day after day, especially working together since November, we've seen what kind of players and what kind of headlines move the needle really well. And a lot of them surround playing the young players. I think if they were to run it back in some form, I really don't think there would be a lot of fits. Now, maybe if they start the season 10 and 22, maybe it's a different discussion.
What about 10 and 14?
No, I don't think so. I really don't. That's my point. As I was going to say, take it 12 and 15. I don't think so. I don't.
Okay.
I think it'd be a lot of the same. Secondly, and I wonder if this will really rile up the YouTube chat, I think when you're talking about the narrative of, they got the young players and continue developing, you know what that sounds like? Sounds like the other team that we've been talking a lot about on KNBR, a baseball team that resides here in San Francisco.
Yeah.
And no, they do not have a Steph Curry like Buster Posey is done. Barry Bonds, long gone. So it's not an exact parallel analogy, but I do think when we've talked about the Giants, it's been a lot of, oh, Elliot Ramos and Luis Matos show some promise. They've won a few games. This is great. And then all of a sudden they dip 3 games below 500 and you're like, well, the team with the second highest payroll maybe will make a wild card in an expanded MLB playoffs, but they're not going to contend.
Yeah, I look, I've sensed a little bit of a shift, I think, in the last couple of days among, and look, there are different factions of this Warriors fan base, but I've sensed a little bit of a shift even among those who believe Jonathan Kuminga is the second coming of like Giannis Antetokounmpo, to where it's like, hey, if this team wants to get anything done in the short term, he's going to have to be included. Talking about Kuminga, I've sensed a shift there. I really have. I've sensed a shift even among the media on that front that has always been extremely protective, and I'll say it, overly protective of the Warriors' young players, because I think their belief is that their readership and viewership loves the young players to a point where if they're promoted, that's still going to be beneficial to their bottom line. I'll even bring the business aspect in it. I think there's people who are tied and have their careers tied to the Warriors being relevant who have made a shift towards they got to freaking do something because they're petrified. And I'm being honest, I'm taking you behind the curtain a little bit, that they're petrified that this team being mid as they've been in 2023 and 2024, going back to the last 2 regular seasons, that's gonna not be enough to keep them relevant enough to where their readership is still going to be at the level to where their careers can continue at the level that they've been these last couple of years. So I think there's been a dynamic shift, to be perfectly honest and be real on this thing. To those with agendas, Greg, I know you love talking about agendas. I think those with agendas have shifted to, oh my God, the Warriors have to actually do something a little bit different. Whereas I think a couple of months ago, even, there was this belief that they can run it back with the young guys in development, and Steph is still going to be good. And even if they can't win a title, development, and Kuminga is the next superstar and all of that. Like, I think those in the know now fully know that ain't it for the next 2 years. Now, whether they've actually vetted their sources a lot more deeply than maybe they did in the past, or whether it's just a full-blown reality check, regardless of what that is, I've sensed it. I don't know if you have from reading articles and reading the tweets and listening to interviews and those kinds of things, but I firmly believe that there's been, in a way, a little bit more of a push toward, hey, the Warriors have to do something kind of big if this thing's going to matter moving forward here these next couple of years.
You can say this is a cynical take off of that. Let's just say these trade rumors wash over and they do kind of run it back to some degree and they're not able to get a deal done. I think a lot of people are going to talk themselves back into the young players revolutionizing again.
That's
come
fair.
October.
That's fair. That's great. That's a great point. I'll let you finish that point, but that's a great point. I mean,
that was the point. I don't really have anything to add to it.
No, I think, well, but at that point, what are you going to do? Right? I mean, at that point, what are you going to do if you're pushing toward, hey, you need to do X, Y, and Z, and the team that you're covering doesn't do X, Y, and Z, and then, well, what do you have left to sell? And I use this, I say sell, again, I'm not saying these are a bunch of propagandists necessarily that are covering the Warriors, but I do think there are some vested interests, and I do think there are some agendas. I really do. And I'll be honest, without mentioning anybody specifically, I've sensed a shift in the last couple of weeks toward, the talk around the league is they're going to have to include someone significant, maybe Jonathan Kuminga, if they want to get anything of consequence done. And now all of a sudden we're reading the reports about, oh, the Warriors are interested in this and they want to do that. Whereas all of the lead up to this has been, oh, well, they don't want to give up any of the young players. And they're shopping Wiggins and they're shopping Chris Paul alone. And again, one of my pet peeves, Greg, because we've done this show long enough. My pet peeves are teams that want to trade all the guys they're disappointed in and none of the guys they like in an attempt to get better. That doesn't work. That's not reality. And I feel like the Warriors, to a certain extent, have been stuck in that mode.
Yeah, and I mean, look, we'll take a break in a sec because we've been going an hour strong, and we'll kind of come back and get into sector 2 of the show here. But I guess what I would just close with it is I'm rooting for the young players as long as they're in the Bay Area. I like a lot of their young player games. And going back to the agenda thing, there is no agenda here. But if this Warriors team that existed in 2023-24 lost in 6 games in the Western Conference semis, we'd be having a different discussion about what this team is than if they lost in the 9-10 play-in game by 20-plus points in Sacramento. Like, that's the bottom line to me. So it's not, I don't think the young players have a chance to flourish. And it's not that I don't think they could be anything, but you can't look at the entirety of last season, do a post-game show for every game like we did, and just head into the next one with the delusion of, I think this is a Western Conference Finals team. Like, what? If you don't get a second best player, you don't get anybody? Like, how can we expect that much different? Because the West is certainly not getting worse.
The West is not getting worse. I think you look at it from top to bottom, and I know the Mavs went to the NBA Finals, but I think Minnesota's going to try to get better. I think Denver's certainly going to try to get better. Oklahoma City already is better with the addition of Alex Caruso for Josh Giddey here within the last couple of days.
And Nikola Topic, post ACL repair.
Yes, post ACL repair. Good knowledge on that front. We'll see about the Clippers. Maybe the Warriors and Clippers end up doing some work there as far as everything else goes. But no, I think, and by the way, to this point, we are keeping an eye on the NBA draft. I mean, this is our Just Dubs NBA draft show. Again, NBA draft show may appear to be disingenuous because I think this is the worst draft of the last 40 years in the NBA, or at least the least needle moving draft of the last 40 years on the surface. As you look at some of the players that are going to be picked, and the Warriors are going to pick at 52 tomorrow at sometime during the afternoon when the Giants are taking on the Cubs over at Oracle Park. The Warriors are going to make a pick, and then we're going to be on talking about it on KNBR tomorrow from 6 to 9, by the way. So I want to make sure we promote that. Our Warriors Just Dubs NBA draft coverage tomorrow from Harmonic Brewing in Thrive City, 6 to 9. We'll be wrapping up all the NBA headlines from today and tomorrow, and we'll see if the Warriors wind up doing anything not only at number 52, but maybe something bigger than number 52. And if big news breaks here between now and Monday, basically, really between now and 4th of July, we're going to be all over it, whether it's on the KNBR YouTube or whether it's going to be over the KNBR airwaves, depending upon the night. We're going to be truly all over it. So I want to make sure we promote all of that here, as it is John Dickinson and Greg Silver for KNBR and our Just Dubs NBA draft coverage here through round 1 of the NBA draft as we watch the picks come up to the stage and shake hands with Commissioner Greg's cousin, Adam Silver.
Uncle Adam. Yeah, that's my guy,
I thought it was your cousin. That's your uncle?
He's Uncle Adam to everybody in the family.
I mean, I thought he was kind of the older cousin. Everybody's got that like one older cousin. I thought he was like the significantly older cousin, but I guess you're right. It probably would be more of an uncle.
Yeah, like the cousin who you go to their wedding when you're 5 years old and you go because you're forced and you don't really know what's going on. And then it gets brought up 15 years down the line and you're like, oh yeah, like when I was forced to wear like a fake tuxedo.
Yeah, no cap wants no breaks. No cap 757 is like, no breaks. We're going to take like a 3-4 minute break real quick. We've got a few others. Andis Brown, this is some good stuff from JD and Greg. I mean, we're trying. Pine Needle is a loser. Pine Needle's a loser. Feel free to never listen or watch again. Have a nice life.
Yeah, I mean, like, dude, honestly,
Adios.
hey, listen. Anyone that wants to throw hate my way, first of all, it's not like anything you're saying I've never heard before. And second of all, no one's paying you to watch it. Like, this is some free entertainment, man. Take it or leave it.
Silicon Valley man, JD has crossed over from confident dude to cocky fellow. I'm not sure what that means. There's a few people who think I've had a few. Like there was a guy that's like, JD's had a few. I'm like, actually, no, I've just been doing about 6 hours of radio and I've got the bright lights shining down on me. So I'm sweating a little bit. Like I have not had anything.
I'll step in and just say that if you spend enough time with JD, you kind of come to realize that he's got a motor, you know, and I say that with love, but like sometimes there's no difference between you having a few and you having zero. And it just comes to like the passion and the motor. It really does.
Yeah, no, I've had none actually today. So I don't know that's not a great sign. I mean, that was like an hour ago, I think, as we were getting things rolling, as it was Elevated Minds with a Z. No, I haven't had any, but yeah, no cap 757. This is JD raw and uncut. I don't know that it's been anything crazy. I mean, I've dropped a couple S-bombs, but other than me dropping a couple S-bombs, I don't know that it's been anything outside of the norm. And that's just because we're on YouTube only, Greg.
Yeah. Just going to be fun to go back and dig through it. Sometimes, even if it's clean, it's really funny to just censor words if you go back and listen, like let people use their imagination. And it's great. I've learned so many weird little tricks about the digital and radio space in this last year.
Have you ever experienced a more boring first round of the NBA draft in your lifetime, Greg? Because I can think of one in your lifetime.
How many times have we brought up the actual picks today?
Well, yeah, and very few, but that's in part because the Warriors don't have any. Like if the Warriors were picking at 14, I think we would have run through every one of the top 13. But the Warriors, like if the Warriors suddenly popped up on the clock at 27 or something like that, then I think we would have a completely different conversation about it. But there's one draft specifically that I think in your lifetime would be among the worst. But I don't think it's even as bad as this one.
2013?
You want to take a year? 2013's that's a good guess. There's actually one other one that I think was worse than even 2013.
Ooh, I have to do a little digging and
I'm not going too far, but yeah, you're pretty young. I mean, yeah, you were 2006.
Yeah, I wasn't really paying attention to drafts in 06. Just
2006 would be the draft that I think would rival. 13's a good call. But yeah, 6, 13, and this, but again, and I go back about 35 years on drafts that I can remember and was pretty excited about. And I know I've talked to you about this. I was growing up in Sacramento, and I think Warriors fans of the early to mid to late 30s, even early 40s range in terms of age, like they knew and loved the lottery. And, I grew up in Sacramento and I knew and loved the lottery. So I think anybody of my age that grew up a Warriors fan shares that with anybody of my age who grew up a Kings fan. Like you loved the lottery, right? So I relay that back to 35 years of following the lottery hardcore and hoping that whether it was the Kings or the Warriors, going back to my youth, would come up with somebody big. I remember Joe Smith in 95. I was a kid. I remember Purvis Ellison in 89. Never Nervous Purvis was his nickname. Awful, from Louisville. And I mean, I was a real young then, but he was a dreadful. That was the two times that those teams have had the number one pick here in the last 35 years. And both were, I mean, Joe Smith was a much better pick than Purvis Ellison, but I digress in saying that in rooting for the Northern California teams to make the best of their lottery situations, I cannot remember a draft like this. I cannot remember a draft that is just less compelling than the one that we're witnessing right now.
I'll say this, though, and then we will go to break so I can try to find a way to get this like little streak of light right out of my face. This kind of draft does make me very intrigued about the second round, particularly for the Warriors' sake, and whether or not 5 years from now we're going to look back and be like, oh, that was a legit NBA player.
Oh, yeah, that guy was good. Well, no, I think there's going to be a bunch of guys tonight that we're not focused on, because why would you be focused on it, that are going to wind up being solid players. But I think this is the 10-year pro kind of a draft, as opposed to this is the draft where you're going to get a potential future Hall of Famer, picked in the mid to late first round. Wow. The shadows are coming for Greg Silver. We got to take a break. These are like the 10 a.m. Saturday shadows in February.
Yeah.
For JD. We're clearly positioned on opposite sides of the sun here in our respective home studios.
And while we go to break, I will just say this. If anyone still wants to tune in for these next 3 to 4 minutes, why don't you drop your birth date with the year in it, and maybe we'll have some fun with that at the end of the show.
Andis Brown, JD, my buddy's a massive Kings fan. He wanted the Kings to draft Glenn Rice so bad, and lost it when Purvis was drafted. Yeah, that was 89. That was the 89 draft. So that was like a decade before Greg. BG, before Greg Silver. BGS. It was like a decade before Greg Silver. I will say this. I was born in January 8th, and I was born on a Thursday. So you can figure out the rest of it from there. Everybody else can figure out the rest of it for those who are on YouTube and Twitch and the KNBR Twitter stream as well. Let's go ahead and take a quick break, quick timeout. We got No Cap and Andis and Rockin' New Era 84. We appreciate everybody who is joining us here on our Just Dubs KNBR NBA draft coverage with JD and Silver on the Sports Leader. Hey, welcome back, everybody. No, the Lakers did not select Bronny James at number 17. Dalton Connect from Tennessee goes number 17 overall to the Lakers. First round. We got about 13 picks to go here, 18 to 30 in the first round of the 2024 NBA draft. It is our Just Dubs NBA draft special. It's John Dickinson and Greg Silver here for KNBR, the sports leader, as we are reacting to anything that breaks as it relates to the Warriors. And we can get back into some more Warriors conversation coming up here. We're going to be on tomorrow as well, 6 to 9. Round 2 of the draft is going to be at 1 o'clock tomorrow in the afternoon, a little matinee. And the Warriors are going to pick at 52, and we'll see if anything breaks. At that point, the Giants are going to be playing the Cubs tomorrow. And if anything breaks in terms of trades or the Warriors draft pick, just let everybody know we got you covered tomorrow beginning at 6 o'clock. It'll be a special Sports Phone KNBR edition here of our Warriors draft coverage on the Sports Leader. So, yeah, keep it locked here for that. Greg, anything stand out for you? I'm looking at the two players from France who go 1-2 to Atlanta and Washington. I'm looking at Reed Shepherd, number 3. Stefan Castle from UConn going number 4 overall to the San Antonio Spurs. Ron Holland II, 5 to Detroit. We're working our way. Klingon went to Portland. Portland ended up making a trade, going back to their second pick of the lottery at number 14, which was originally the Warriors pick. Zach Edey from Purdue to the Grizzlies at number 9 overall. Cody Williams, number 10. I'm just kind of making my way through. Dalton Connect, as we mentioned, number 17. The wing from Tennessee goes to the Lakers, not Bronny James at 17. This is an NBA draft special, so I think we can spend a couple of minutes talking about some of the picks, or at least a minute or two. Anything stand out for you and what I deem to be the least relevant draft of both of our lifetimes?
Yeah, I guess just in doing some draft research, I was hearing a lot of different talks of take the guy you think other teams want, which further illustrates that it's not the most shiny draft we've seen in recent memory, or even less than recent memory. But I mean, I can't say I was surprised, but I understand the move of drafting Topic if you're Oklahoma City, because you don't necessarily need that role to be filled right now, and you're kind of playing with house money with all the picks you have. Worst case, it doesn't work out and you trade that potential elsewhere. I know his shooting was a little bit of a question mark on his scouting report. OKC's got a handful of shooting, so I get it. Reed Shepherd's going to be an interesting one to me because of all the NCAA prospects, that was one where people were very high on, and everyone's going to remember the tournament game, Kentucky versus Oakland. And look, there's a long history of players who were NBA built and rightfully went in the top 5 that did not have very good tournament games. Reigning finals MVP being one of them. Atrocious tournament game with Cal. Cade Cunningham kind of underperformed in the tournament too. So I wouldn't read too much into that for Reed Shepherd, but it's more the size and kind of wondering, is he a long-term role player, kind of a guard, or is it, man, you really cannot leave this guy on an island kind of thing? I guess I'm most interested in that pick just because of what the Rockets did last year, being ahead of schedule on the rebuild. And I wonder if he's the type of player that would work well with Ime Udoka.
Yeah, and the Rockets are the kind of team that I think has to be better. They have to add talent in an attempt to be closer to the same level team that they were last year. Like, I think they overachieved. I think anytime there's a team that overachieved a little bit in one year, they have to add more talent than their natural progression would be to make it all add up. And I think the Rockets are one of those teams as it relates to this year. But yeah, they were on the clock at number 3. They end up with Reed Shepherd. I do think Reed Shepherd is a skill set that does help Houston moving forward. And we'll see what ends up happening as far as, them acquiring a bunch of, having the ability to get some picks and maybe make a trade, going back to being able to get Kevin Durant, which has been a big rumor of the last 24 hours. So we'll keep everybody posted on that. Yeah, Andis Brown, it's crazy. Shepard went 3. Any other draft, he would have been a borderline lottery pick at best. Like, I think you could make the case. And Andis Brown does it. I mean, I was thinking of Brandon Podziemski. Like, is Brandon Podziemski a better player given everything we know about Brandon Podziemski? Is Brandon Podziemski in his rookie season, is that season that we just saw, does that project to be better than the rookie season of Reed Shepard? And he was picked at 19, and Reed Shepard was picked at number 3 overall.
Yeah. I mean, is he going to be first team all rookie in a worse class? That's another question too. By the way, just want to get into this because I think this does have some relevance to not just the draft, but also going back to the Warriors. Orlando is on the clock, and they just picked Tristan da Silva, the 6'8" forward from Colorado. I know Orlando is now the betting favorite for Klay Thompson's landing spot.
Saw that.
Looking at Tristan da Silva, it is really interesting. He really improved over the course of his 4 years. Free throw percentage was 58 his freshman year, and he got all the way up to 83. His senior year, scoring averages went up, but the three-point shot was also not there freshman year. Immediately big jump from 26 to 37% by his sophomore year, and was shooting 39.5 from deep in this last year. So I haven't watched a ton of Pac-12 or Pac-12 no longer over the last year, but I think about a Franz Wagner type of player that can maybe hit some more shots outside. You never want to just directly translate college numbers and apply them to the NBA, where it's a whole lot different. But that's interesting to see. They took a guy that had a really big shooting and scoring trajectory when that's clearly something they lack, and someone who is a little bit taller than Klay Thompson by an inch or two.
Yeah, Tristan da Silva, 18 from Colorado to Orlando, number 18 overall here in the draft. As Toronto's going to be on the clock at number 19, Cleveland 20, and then you run through the Pelicans, Suns, Bucks, Knicks again. They've got back-to-back picks at this point, at least as is scheduled. And then Washington, Minnesota, Denver, Utah, and the Boston Celtics, who according to reports, are looking to move off of number 30 overall in the 2024 NBA draft and on in maybe to the second round. The Warriors are going to be on the clock at number 52 overall. That will be tomorrow during the afternoon. Of course, we'll keep everybody updated on that here on KNBR, the sports leader, as we'll be on tomorrow with our NBA draft special, our Just Dubs NBA draft special, beginning at 6 p.m. So it's going to be kind of a recap of everything that's gone on over not only today, but tomorrow. We'll see if there are some big trades made between now and the end of the night, and we will react to them accordingly if that news breaks and comes down the pike. What else do we have in terms of, and I know a big part of this show, Greg, was going to be reaction to Mike Dunleavy Jr.'s press conference from a couple of days ago, because the Warriors are not on the clock tonight, and also reacting to some of the rumors of earlier today. And I spoke to a ton of those with John Lund on Papa and Lund as I was filling in for Papa here the last couple of days. Looks like I'm going to be filling in for Papa tomorrow as well as Friday here to kind of close out the week. So kind of a long week there. But what were some
maybe by the end of the week, you will have to have a few.
Maybe, but I haven't had any today. That's not a great sign, actually, that the audience is like, oh, JD's dipping into the liquid hot take courage. If anything, it may show you that the lights here that I have shining on me in the home studio are maybe burning the face down a little bit.
Hey, we know the chat loves to have fun with us. I know Erwin Kwong isn't here with us tonight, but he loves taking fun and playful jabs.
I wish I'd had a few, Greg. I wish I'd had a few. Like, that actually hurt my soul. I was like, oh God, that's not good. If I haven't had anything and people are thinking I have, then we're in a bad spot.
Hey, there was one night where it was the week after the Super Bowl, and you had gotten ill coming back from Vegas along with like our entire staff. And so we did the Dubs OT where I did most of it and had you in for a segment. But because the cameras were taken to Vegas, when they came back, the settings were all off. So everyone on the camera was making fun of how I was looking. And I probably looked a lot worse than if I had just had a few, which thankfully was sober to have to talk 4 hours. But yeah, that was a fun memory for sure.
Yeah, no doubt. And an unbelievable job by you going back to about 4.5 months ago now, which is pretty crazy. No Cap 757, JD, what's your guys' thoughts on NBA trade report on Twitter earlier reporting the Warriors are in talks with the Bucks on Wiggins for Portis plus filler? I love Bobby Portis. I don't love that trade. And, that I had wondered if the Warriors would maybe be interested, not in Portis, but in Brook Lopez potentially for that kind of a deal. And not that that's a problem kind of a deal, but a really good question, no cap. I love Bobby Portis as an acquisition. I would not want Bobby Portis at the expense of Andrew Wiggins.
How about the expense of Trace Jackson Davis?
I'd be fine with that. I mean, ideally you'd have both and Draymond Green. But are you saying Trace Jackson Davis as the other part of the filler maybe in that deal?
No, I guess I meant more impacting his minutes.
Well, it would impact his minutes. I mean, Bobby Portis would be somebody that would be. I mean, Trace Jackson Davis might start, but here's the thing. It's twofold for me, and I'll say this. I love Bobby Portis. Bobby Portis is actually, I think, in many ways, the perfect big. Him and Brook Lopez both guys that can shoot from the outside. Portis has got a mean streak to him that I really like. Really like the mean streak to Bobby Portis, the temper. I'm a big temper guy, and Bobby Portis has got a temper. So I like Bobby Portis. I would like he's a role player, and you're giving up Wiggins as your start. Who's your starting three in that scenario? Is it Kuminga? Well, you're worse. If it's Kuminga, you're worse. Like right off the top. And I'm all for bringing Kuminga into the fold. I'm all for Kuminga continuing to be on the team, if that's the way that this thing plays out as far as the offseason goes, Greg. But I still think Kuminga has to be a 4 and not a 3. And so if you're making a move in which maybe you're getting better in one area, but you're getting worse as far as if you make that move, you have no 3s on your roster. You have no 3s on your roster. So if you're making that move and the news breaks tonight, then you better have the Paul George move ready to roll. You better have if Wiggins is going away, then Paul George or another 3-man better be coming in between now and Sunday afternoon or July 6th or whatever the date is where trades become official.
Yeah, no, I think the reason I've been embracing a lot of the Paul George possibilities is because if Wiggins is a part of said deal, then you have a player that can play the position Andrew Wiggins plays and someone that can fill the void of defending other teams on the perimeter. He can shoot 3s a lot better than Andrew Wiggins, and he's got the length to defend out on the perimeter. I hate to bring this point up for the 27th time in the offseason, but your two best perimeter defenders are Andrew Wiggins, who has been frustrating and inconsistent over the last 2 years, and Gary Payton II, who is good for 15 to 18 minutes a game, 40 to 50 games of the year.
Yeah, I think that's extremely well said. I mean, when you look at the way things go, and I'm shuffling through a bunch of different tweets on a bunch of different players right now, so I'm kind of shuffling through some different screens here. But as far as the Warriors go, I just can't. I can't get on board if I'm the Warriors with making an Andrew Wiggins move as much as I like Bobby Portis, unless there's a bona fide like here's the thing. If you told me that there's a deal in place and Paul George is coming over and the Warriors, let's say they're top 8, I'll just say this. Let's say there's a top 8 coming over and welcome CA into the chat here on KNBR, the sports leader. What's going on, CA? What's going on, CA? Woodpit 420, George's injury history worries me. I think George's motor worries me even more so. Woodpit 420, Kuminga has to shoot way better to play the 3. Totally agree with that. Here's my deal. If Wiggins is going for Bobby Portis, then there has to be the deal for Paul George coming back. And whether Kuminga is in that deal or not in that deal, I think he has to be in that deal. But I mean, it hasn't been specifically reported that he would be. I don't see how he couldn't be. But it has to lead to, all right, Steph's your one. Let's just run through it. Steph, Podziemski. Let's say both of these things happen. Steph, Podziemski, Paul George, Draymond, and then you have to figure out, like, is it Paul George and Draymond and TJD? Is it Paul George and Draymond and Bobby Portis? We'll see. Let's just say it's TJD, then Bobby Portis is coming off the bench. You got to figure out Klay Thompson, because I don't think Klay Thompson is directly tied to whether the Warriors make that move for Paul George. I think he might be indirectly tied, but so he could be potentially in the equation. But then you get into who some of the backups might be for the Warriors. TJD, you look at Moody, maybe is still around at that point. Maybe he's not. I tend to think that Looney and GP2 are gone in scenarios involving Paul George coming to the Warriors, but it's basically Steph, Podziemski, Paul George infusing these two together, Draymond, Portis, TJD coming off the bench, and then you got to figure out the rest of what your bench is gonna look like at that point. I think Kuminga would have to be in that kind of a deal. But yeah, I mean, as Andis Brown says, I mean, Paul George is 34, which doesn't make this a perfect scenario under any circumstances. But yeah, Portis and Draymond, Portis is a feisty dude. I love Bobby Portis. I love hot-tempered Bobby Portis shooting threes and working down low in the post and wanting to fight dudes. I think the Warriors need more dudes that want to fight dudes. I like that.
But maybe for Draymond Green alone, he could want to fight dudes a little less.
Yeah, not Draymond. They're not fighting each other. Come on, that can't happen. They're not fighting each other.
We've seen the teammate clash over the past couple of years.
Indeed, we have.
Not going to name the incident, but
indeed we have. What do you think of that as a baseline? Who else would be around? Who else wouldn't be around in that particular hypothetical?
I mean, the Klay thing's a huge question mark. I think in that scenario alone, it actually doesn't impact Klay's reality a lot, maybe unless you take the money into consideration and what he would want and all that. But that's kind of a side discussion. And I think that truthfully, if we're talking about Klay Thompson in relation to a lot of this, we've mentioned this, and you probably said the same thing with John Lund and maybe Murph this week. It probably upsets Klay that what the Warriors can offer him or what his situation is very much dependent on these 7 or 8 other maps of possibilities that Mike Dunleavy Jr., Joe Lacob, Steve Kerr, and all the powers that be have in front of them. I think that they might only be able to offer Klay Thompson $12 million, and they got to come to terms with that. Or maybe you can do 2 for $50 after all, depending on things. But like, if there's a Bobby Portis kind of deal, then it's like, well, how much is left for Klay? And I think that's a fair question to ask. I don't think for Klay alone, that deal doesn't work. And I agree that I like Bobby Portis, but you can't just do Wiggins for Bobby Portis in some kind of iteration and have that be your move. Now, if it was Kuminga for Bobby Portis, I think you could say it fits a little bit better just through the 1 through 5. I don't know how much better it makes you, though, especially because you don't know what you're getting out of an Andrew Wiggins, you know?
Yeah, no, I definitely know exactly what you're talking about. I mean, I would love to have Bobby Portis on this Warriors roster, but to me, the best case scenario for the Warriors would be a scenario where they can get Paul George and still have Andrew Wiggins on the team, to be honest, because I think Andrew Wiggins is better if he goes from the number 2 option to the number 3 option because Paul George is number 2 option. And then maybe that means you can't get a guy like Bobby Portis, but you have to look in another direction as to how you fill out the roster. I think regardless of all of this, you'd rather have Klay Thompson back. And I get that maybe things are too far down the line where Klay's pissed off and unhappy and frustrated and feels disrespected and all those things. But to me, the best scenario for the Warriors would be, based on everything that we've seen to this point that's been reported, get Paul George and keep Klay. And I know Bob Myers was on ESPN, the former GM of the Warriors, and Bob Myers said, hey, you might do that. It might still not be enough. And guess what? Bob's not wrong. It might not be enough, Greg. But you know what Bob didn't say? He didn't say that means you don't do it. He did not say that means you don't do it. And I would still do it. I would still do it because I am not worried about protecting 2027, 28, 29 if I'm the Golden State Warriors and beyond. I am much more worried about you've got 2 to 4 years, really probably 3, of Steph Curry. I know he's under contract for 2, but you've got 2+ years, we'll call it, of Steph. Maximize that freaking timeline to the best of your ability. Try to keep Klay Thompson in the fold, but try to get that number 2 in here for that point in time. Jonathan Kuminga be damned, and let's see what this Warriors team can do from there.
In the same vein of you could trade Jonathan Kuminga or Trace Jackson Davis or Brandon Pajemski and regret it this season or the next season or 10 years down the line, you also could not trade anybody and still be a 27-win team in 2027.
Correct.
With a lot of the same group.
Well said.
And I'm not saying that means I'm rooting for anything. It's not saying that I've been hearing rumblings about the young guys suck or Greg Silver hates the young guys. That's not what I'm saying at all.
Agendas. You got an agenda. Greg Silver's got an agenda. He's got an agenda. Greg Silver hates the young guys. Hates them. As a young guy, Greg Silver hates the young guys. I'm breaking that news. I hate
being young, so I'm taking it out on my my fellow tribesmen here.
Greg, yes.
My point is, like, you're probably rebuilding in some form or another. Is it a soft rebuild? Is it a short-term rebuild? Or is it a long-term hard rebuild where you're not good for another 25 years? I cannot answer those questions for you. But the second that Steph Curry and Draymond Green and Steve Kerr walk out the door, you're in some form of a rebuild. And that is probably why Kerr got a 2-year contract extension, because I know there's a lot of rumblings about him too, but do you think Steph and Draymond want to have like a fresh start at the very last chapter of what this is for them? I don't think that makes sense for them either. So It's going to be a rebuild one way or another.
No freaking chance they want that rebuild at this particular point in time. By the way, Jalen Tyson, Greg.
Ooh.
20 overall to the Cleveland Cavaliers. Breaking news. And also Kenny Atkinson, officially a 5-year deal to be the head coach of the Cleveland Cavaliers. So Jalen Tyson, 20 to Cleveland, going to be coached by Kenny Atkinson. So there you go.
Hey, good for Jalen Tyson. He was a big part in taking the worst and most embarrassing program in the entire NCAA and making them pretty competitive and respectable and help them close out some big games in the conference. So the no longer existing Pac-12, but good for Jalen Tyson. That's exciting, man.
Yeah, I know the Silver family. Big cow representation.
I'm actually waiting on my UCSB Gaucho and a guy I covered, by the way, AJ Mitchell.
Okay.
Yeah.
I will let you know. We will break in if Mitchell winds up going here in what will be the final, looks like 8 picks now, because the Pelicans they've taken the Baylor center at number 21. So we're all the way to number 22 and our path to 30 here. And of course, the Warriors without a pick as we roll on here. KNBR, the sports leader, our YouTube Just Dubs NBA Draft Spectacular. And again, to kind of reiterate what's going on, and we appreciate Woodpit and No Cap and everybody, CA, who's chimed in, Andis Brown, San Jose Jazz fan, the third chiming in here as well. All of our favorites from the YouTube chat. We're going to be with you tomorrow as the Warriors do make their pick. And if there is some news either between now and the end of the night tonight or in the first part of the day tomorrow, as everybody gears up for round 2, I'm going to be out at Harmonic Brewing in Thrive City tomorrow from 6 to 9. We're going to be doing the full 3-hour over the radio. And for those of you who've said, oh, JD's had a few. No, not tonight, but tomorrow, absolutely. Tomorrow at 7:25, halfway through our show, Greg, I will have had at least 2 at that point, because Jimmy and Mike and Shay and Julia and maybe a few others. Maybe a few others have poured me a Kolsch.
They'll be treating you well.
They will be treating me well.
Yeah.
No, they will be treating me well, without a doubt. So, yeah, looking forward to that tomorrow out at Harmonic Brewing. And Tolbert and Copes are going to be out there. At least the Copes portion of Tolbert and Copes are going to be out there post-Giants game tomorrow. So looking forward to that as well here on KNBR right after the Giants game. Out there in the corner at the corner table at Harmonic Brewing in Thrive City with the second round of the draft ongoing beginning at 1:00. I'm going to be out there early in the afternoon watching the draft, hanging out. Then we've got a little bit of a break. I'm going to go over inside Chase Center and hear from Mike Dunleavy Jr. on what the Warriors do. Maybe they look into adding another pick as well. And then, looking forward to talking with everybody tomorrow night. And we've also got our free agency special, which is going to be on Monday from 6 to 9 here on KNBR. Really, really looking forward to all of that here over the next 5-6 nights on the Sports Leader.
Yeah, it's exciting. This is a fun time. You know, we've had a lot of Just Dubs offseason podcasts, and sometimes there hasn't been a whole lot to talk about, or it's been trying to read between the lines and making any sense of the postseason. And I actually want to kind of take that spirit and play another Dunleavy cut.
Let's do it.
Because they asked Mike Dunleavy about what he learned from watching the postseason. And I think that it was an interesting answer in the sense that you've seen 6 different champions in the last 6 seasons. Each of them have been very different iterations of teams, all champion worthy. And so this is what Mike Dunleavy had to say if this particular postseason and the Boston Celtics taking home Larry O'Brien impacted any of his offseason thinking.
I think we're all watching. We're observing. We're seeing trends. We're seeing what's going on. I mean, last year it was, oh, man, the game has changed. Big guys are in vogue. Jokic, they won the championship. To have a dynamic guy like that. And this year, I think there's a lot of talk about the three-point shooting and really good guard play defensively from those Boston guards. So you get all these new kind of trends that are going in a certain direction. And it's good, but I think you have to also be mindful of it. There's a lot of ways to skin a cat. And I think there's a lot of ways to build a team. And so you got to kind of go with what you have and what makes sense building around your group. And that's kind of what we'll look to do. I don't think there's one singular way to do it, but there's some good concepts and ideas about it. And at the core of it, it's generally like good defense, competitiveness, high IQ, toughness, those types of things are always really, really important. And then like the skill stuff and the position and the archetype things can vary, but I think there's a core base of things you need to win, and we'll continue to pursue those.
Always trying to pursue that core group of things that help you win is Mike Dunleavy Jr. there. Not a lot of grandiose takeaways from MDJ on Monday. Still, I think trying to, in some ways, figure out the press conference portion of being an NBA general manager, but also trying to be as forthcoming as he can possibly be without saying anything. I think I go back to last year and the whole, we're committed to Jordan Poole. And then it was like deuces 4 days later, like Jordan Poole's going to Washington. The Warriors are acquiring Chris Paul.
I think Tim Kawakami brought that up in the press conference, which was funny.
Yeah, my favorite two questions. That one from Tim was among my favorites. The other one that was my favorite was Monty Poole of NBC Sports Bay Area, who said, hey, Mike, the Celtics basically won the title because of trades. And the Mavs got to the finals from an 11 seed to the finals. Hello, are there any parallels there? The Warriors are the 10 seed, didn't make the playoffs based on trades that they made in not only the deadline trades, which is part of it, but that the deadline trades were set up by the trade that they made last year, which was, hey, we're going to get Kyrie Irving. We're going to get our second best player right now. And we're taking a risk to get that second best player. And it paid off. And so I think, and look, I'm not the first person to say this, but the Mavs example is definitely one that I think that the Warriors have to try to follow here moving forward if they want to try it. Like, it should give them hope, right? Like, the Mavs example should give, I think, the Warriors hope that they can figure it out here over the course of the next week or the next couple of weeks to where they can start to set the tone toward trying to get from 10 at least into the top 6 here for the next year.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, they have the core to build around. So, that's not the hard part, but apparently trades are hard, as we've learned. As No Cap says, Mike, trades are hard. Dunleavy.
I hate that. I hated that. John Lund hated that more than I did. I hated the whole player development is the best way to improve your team. Like, dude, that ain't it, man. Like, that's not this team. I hated that. I hated trades are hard though too. That was a quick second for me. Trades are hard. Well, that's your freaking job. Make some trades. Let's go.
JD calling to action. Mike Dunleavy Jr. You got it on the tape right here.
You can't sit back, Greg. You can't sit back. You absolutely.
Also, what's up to Rebel to Sounds? Another one of our faves joining.
Yeah, you were going where I was going. What's up, Rebel to Sounds? Appreciate you. Was it Kirito, MVP 11? Mike Dunleavy Jr. already said he doesn't know how to be an NBA GM. There it is. He wanted to be a college basketball coach, not an NBA GM. Well, we appreciate you joining the conversation tonight. He's an NBA GM. He's got to figure it out. And I think he's more than capable of being able to figure it out. Making trades is part of the freaking job, Greg.
Well, also, to Dunleavy Jr.'s credit, I think he had a actually pretty solid first year on the job. He made a trade to get rid of Jordan Poole's money, which was a lot of money that the Warriors would have had to pay, even more than their already very expensive payroll. And he went 2 for 2 on draft picks. Can't say that wasn't true.
He did. No doubt he did, and they won 2 more games than they did the prior couple of years. No cap, JD. You guys like Wiggins for Kuzma? No, I don't. I don't.
Less defense.
Short and sweet. Here's the thing on Kuzma. Kuzma's won a title, and he's gotten paid. Now you can say the same thing about Wiggins. Now, Wiggins was a high-end guy, number 1 overall pick, somebody that the Warriors had gotten to play at a really high championship caliber, 16 game level type of a player. My thing with I think Kuzma is, and no, I like DeAndre Hunter even less. I don't like DeAndre Hunter at all. No cap 757. I would not.
He's been injured a lot too.
Yeah, I would not trade Andrew Wiggins for DeAndre Hunter. I wouldn't, straight up. But yeah, I don't like Kuzma. I think Kuzma's won and gotten paid and is looking to get paid even more. So I think Kuzma's in my stay away from that dude category. And I would say that I know Sacramento specifically. I know sometimes we talk about Sacramento. Their name continues to pop up. They ended up making their pick at 13. There was a wide range of speculation that they were going to trade. I know they've seemingly been overly infatuated with Kyle Kuzma. Let me tell you something. Kyle Kuzma for Harrison Barnes wouldn't help Sacramento. I'll just go on record as saying that right now. And yeah, what about Colin Sexton for Andrew Wiggins? Okay. Who's your starting 3? And yeah, and I'm not coming down anybody's road, no cap or Andis or Rebel or anybody. Like, I'm not, like, these are all fair conversations to bring up. I don't think anybody's silly for bringing them up. But yeah, I think Kuzma in many ways is kind of a losing player. Now you might say, hey, Wiggins isn't a winning player either at this point, but we've seen how both of them can be a championship player in their own right. I think Kuzma, though, I don't know what's going on with Wiggins, Greg. Like, Wiggins, I think, is some personal issues, some motivational issues. I think Kuzma's just kind of a slap, to be honest. Like, I think he's won it. He's gotten paid. He wants to get paid again. He's been in LA with the Lakers. Like, I just think he's kind of a slappy.
Yeah, and I mean, I think even Laker fans, and I lived around a lot of Laker fans for a good 5 years when I was down south in Santa Barbara, and I think they felt disappointed by him too. Like, that was the piece they chose to keep when they made the trade for Anthony Davis. They got rid of Lonzo Ball, they got rid of Brandon Ingram, they got rid of Josh Hart, and they kept Kyle Kuzma around, and I think he never really had that jump that they were really expecting anyway. Like, I mean, was he a number 2 on that Lakers championship team? No. Was he the 3?
No, I don't think he was. I mean, I have to go back. I mean, that was during COVID. I'd have to think about it. You could maybe technically say that, but I also think you can look at it as, you know, that team had Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. That team had, like, I don't know. That team had
KCP to me.
That team
was
had
much
Caruso.
More the 3rd guy.
Yeah, that team had, and I know Caruso wasn't the 3, but they had championship caliber role players. And then, Kuzma was a part of that deal. So no, I don't think Kuzma was a straight up 3 on that team, to be honest.
Yeah, and I don't know. I hear a Kuzma for Wiggins transaction, and the first thing that comes to mind is less defense, possibly the same level of unreliability and inconsistency.
Yeah, no, and I'm looking at the 2019-20 Lakers roster that ended up winning the championship in the bubble.
Like JaVale McGee, Rondo.
Yeah, and I mean, it's interesting. You look at obviously Anthony Davis and LeBron James and Kuzma. I mean, Kuzma was the 3rd leading scorer on that team. So, but KCP was right there. They had Deion Waiters for a stretch. I mean, Avery Bradley was still a player at that point. Danny Green was on that team, playing 68 games. So, I guess Kyle Kuzma was maybe the 3. Although I think in a lot of ways, Kentavious Caldwell-Pope was the more important player for that team among that group.
And he went on to be a championship caliber player for Denver.
Yeah, he did go on to be a championship and a hell of a move and I think he's a team that other players or other teams are looking to be able to acquire too. I think there's a market for Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, and I think he's in a position where he can maybe opt out from Denver. And look, Denver's going to have to be able to figure it out if he decides to. Rebel to Sounds, Wiggins, and some future picks for DeJounte Murray. Again, you're trading a wing for a guard. Now, DeJounte Murray can be a point of attack defender, which is good. But then again, I'll say what I've said a few different times. Who's your starting 3? At that point, if DeJounte Murray's your starting 2 and Podziemski's coming off the bench, and we'll see what they do with Klay Thompson, who's your starting 3? It's Kuminga, right? No. They don't have one.
It is, and it isn't.
It is and it isn't. They don't have a starting 3 at that point. So, yeah, Andis Brown, I wholeheartedly agree on Kuzma. Kuzma's the type of player who loves what basketball does for him, his lifestyle. I don't think he loves ball. I think he loves ball, but I think he is more concerned with the lifestyle and the money and the accolades and the follows and all of that stuff. And again, I'm reluctant. This is a JD rule of sports, but in particular in the NBA. I'm reluctant to go get guys who've already won titles in certain circumstances and expect them to be leaders to help you get another title. Like, you really have to do your homework as to, is that guy somebody who got his title and is kind of done with it, versus is that guy a guy who got his title and wants to be a leader among a team that's trying to get another title?
Well, you could kind of flip that the other side and say maybe other teams are having that conversation about Klay
and Wiggins.
Yeah.
And Wiggins. To that point. No, I don't think look, I said it, and there was some pushback in certain factions when I said it. I don't think there's any added value for a team looking to acquire Klay Thompson in terms of leadership or, championship experience. Yes. Leadership. No. Klay Thompson in the last 2 years has not been any sort of a leader for the Golden State Warriors. In fact, I think you could make the case, and we're starting to hear some things come out, from those who are close to it, that Klay's actually been the opposite of a leader the last couple of years. He's been kind of a hindrance in terms of leadership, but somebody that does have the championship experience without question.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know I had a little bit of pushback in that regard just because of his competitiveness, but I would say that he certainly hasn't been a leader for this locker room, and frankly has never really had to be. Like, I would say Looney in a way is much more of a leader despite his quiet personality, just because he leads by example so much than maybe Klay would be. Not in the longevity sense, but in terms of like garnering the same level of respect as a lot of those core guys, I think you put Looney in that category too.
Yeah, I think Looney's been more of a leader from the traditional standpoint of what a leader is than Klay's been. Now, sometimes Klay's been that guy just based on his gaudy performance, but that gaudy performance has not been there these last couple of years. And I think the negative attitude has been there toward, as it relates to Klay Thompson over the course of the last couple of years as well. All right, it's our Just Dubs NBA draft coverage. It is John Dickinson and Greg Silver here on a Wednesday night. It's round 1 of the NBA draft. The Warriors do not have a pick tonight. They're going to pick at number 52, at least on the books tomorrow in round 2, which is going to get going around 1 o'clock. I am scheduled to be with John Lund tomorrow, filling in for Greg Papa again out on the patio at 58 Social tomorrow from 10 until what would that be? I guess about 12 o'clock. And then we'll have Giants pregame coverage coming up for you. And I'm going to head down at that point to Harmonic Brewing and watch. I'm actually going to head over to Chase Center first. I'm going to watch the second round of the draft. We'll see who the Warriors pick. We'll try to get involved in the Mike Dunleavy Jr. press conference. I know, Greg, you're going to be down there as well. And then we're going to reconvene at 6 o'clock tomorrow. And we're doing the full Sports Phone KNBR show, 6 to 9 tomorrow here on the Sports Leader. And we're going to be talking about whatever the Warriors do. That 52nd pick better not be the only thing we're talking about. Because if it is, it's going to be kind of a sleepy show. And we're going to have to figure out some extra topics, which there have been no shortage of here over the last 24 hours.
Yeah, and I think fortunately for us, there should be more news or at least more rumors around the NBA coming in the next 23 hours or so that could give us a little bit of juice as we move along. This is a little bit of an unrelated question, but just kind of scrolling through everything, seeing what we might have missed, seeing anything new that's popped up, kind of got me thinking as I've just run through the feed of everything. This has got to be the first time in your lifetime where a WNBA draft class was much more highly touted than an NBA draft class, right?
I'd have to think about it to give you an honest answer, but off the top of my head, without a doubt. Without a doubt. There are, big time stars in the WNBA class over the NBA. Again, this is the most underwhelming NBA draft class I can ever remember, and I go back 35 years of I'm older than that, but I go back 35 years of basically locking in on the Wednesday or Thursday that the first round of the NBA draft was set to be. And no disrespect to anybody who's been picked tonight or anybody that's going to be picked here, as the Knicks have just selected at number 24. They're going to be on the clock again at 25. Keyshawn George from Miami is the 24th pick. He goes to the Knicks. And then we'll see what comes up at 25. They have back-to-back picks scheduled here, and then we'll make our way through the remainder of the first round with Washington and Minnesota, Denver, Utah, and the Boston Celtics at number 30, although the Celtics have been reportedly trying to trade out of that, and we'll see what comes. But, I can't remember, again, no shade to any of these players, a more underwhelming first round, and it's by a lot. A more underwhelming first round, 2013, 2006, but damned.
Well, and it's not even to throw shade at the current players who are having their dream fulfilled tonight. I think part of it is that you look at March Madness and the NCAA tournament, a few names from there. Reed Shepherd got bumped out in the first round. You got the two UConn players, but then you got some G League Ignite. You got some international players that you're starting to learn about. You got, some mid-major guys that are probably going to get taken late today or early tomorrow. And then, so it's interesting there. And whereas with the women's players, we went all the way into the second round where I knew much more about some of the draftees and prospects coming out just by doing so much less research. Caitlin Clark and Cameron Brink and Angel Reese aside, you still had Cardoso, you had Nika Mule, Leah Edwards is having a really good rookie season. So it's great for that league for sure. But it's interesting that this is something I've never really experienced before.
Yeah, no question. And I think, I think, Nika Mule is somebody that I'm a big fan of hers. I feel for Cameron Brink and her season-ending injury there going back. But there are top to bottom. You named a bunch of players that were all selected at the top end of that draft, and they're all more well-known because of their college careers than the players that we've seen go in the top now 24, 25 of the NBA draft. So no doubt, although San Jose Jazz fan points out France having a golden generation, I think that's fair to say, Greg.
Yeah, I'm not going to argue with that one at all.
Yeah, top 2 in the draft here tonight in the NBA draft with the number 1 and 2 picks from Atlanta and Washington. Also, they've got the number 6 pick. Huge deal there. And yeah, looking through the board there, big first round for France. All right, let's go ahead and do a quick timeout. Again, as we did about an hour, we took a quick timeout. Let's take another quick timeout as we've reached the 2-hour mark here. And we'll come back and we'll wrap things up unless something of significance breaks. We've got the Knicks about to make their second pick in a row, and then we've got a few more picks here to close out the first round. We'll hit on some other Warriors topics. We'll get into some more Mike Dunleavy Jr. topics as well, as it is KNBR, the sports leader. All right, we're back. It's Just Dubs, our NBA draft coverage. It's John Dickinson. It's Greg Silver for KNBR, the sports leader. We're back tomorrow, 6 to 9 from Harmonic Brewing in Thrive City as the Warriors are going to pick at number 52 overall. Greg, as we wrap things up here, and we'll see if anything breaks in the next 20 minutes or so as we continue through the back end of the first round. But what did you have as far as Mike Dunleavy Jr. goes? And then we can get into some of the big topics of the day that we spent a good chunk of the conversation on as far as the Papa and Lunch show earlier and everything related to Paul George. We'll kind of reset everything. But as far as the Mike Dunleavy Jr. press conference, what else stood out to you?
Yeah, we got a few we can play. I mean, I guess I'll just start with the one that most people have probably heard if they've been keeping up with the KNBR socials or other outlets out in the Bay Area. But listen, Klay Thompson, rightfully so, is a big topic. And as you could expect, not a lot of substance in this answer, but certainly always interesting to hear what general managers have to say. And the reality is negotiations have stalled. Klay Thompson seems upset. And here's what Mike Dunleavy had to say when he finally got a chance to speak on the matter publicly.
And all that stuff, I think, honestly, Tim, is just private. We want him back. I think we said that all along. Hopefully he'll come back. But as far as like the specifics of discussions and those types of things, I think it's important to keep kind of in-house. And when we figure out a solution to all that, we'll have news for you.
Where are you at on Klay Thompson? I think emotionally, this is a big part of it. I think it's, there's a money component, and I know we've talked about, and I mentioned on one of our Just Dubs podcasts when the Malik Monk news broke. I think part of the Malik Monk news breaking related to Klay Thompson in the sense that it in a way set the market, because I don't think that Malik Monk's representation went out and saw the kinds of offers that would have led him to be willing to leave Sacramento. And so he went back and took their max, which was a 4-year, $78 million deal. And I think the rest of the league took note of that, Greg. And, Malik Monk's not even a $20 million a year player in terms of AAV, average annual value. And if Malik Monk's not worth that, when it was thought, Malik Monk might get 3.85 or 3.90, then what does that mean Klay Thompson's worth? And so I think the Warriors are, until proven otherwise, following that path. And it's so fascinating because I think the Warriors have basically guessed right or planned correctly on Klay not being able to get in an open market the money that Klay maybe thought he would have. But then you've got the Anthony Slater reporting in the last couple of days to where Klay's like, well, forget that. You guys didn't open up the bag for me, so I might be out anyway and would take less to move elsewhere because I'm so pissed off about it.
Yeah, and I think there's certain matters we talk about over the course of a season where we maybe do know a little bit more than an average person that wants to troll you on the internet. I think the Klay Thompson negotiation is one of those things where we don't really know a whole lot more than what's been thrown out there. And therefore, it's kind of hard to really gauge it. Now, the most interesting part of the Klay saga and how this has all evolved for me is the point of discussion from guys like Tom Tolbert and some of our other colleagues, where there's a very real scenario out there where Klay Thompson might not get a huge offer from somewhere else and decide to leave anyway, just because he's looking for a new start and he's fed up with how these negotiations have gone and he feels disrespected, or however you want to frame it. That to me is interesting, that it might not really come down to money or money as equated to respect. It might just be Klay Thompson decides it's time to move on. That's interesting. I know we've kind of, in our long list of agendas, which we, go over depth all the time.
Oh yeah. We're all agenda all the time.
Huge agenda guys over here. We had a little bit of different perspectives on Klay, and that you said you're not as emotionally attached. I do have an emotional, sentimental value to Klay Thompson, but what I want to add on to that with my own feelings of appreciation and love for maybe the second greatest Warrior of all time is that I can't be sitting here for the first hour of the show talking with you about Paul George, talking about the possibility of going and getting someone that may or may not work out, but at least it gives you a fighting chance when you got a Steph Curry, and then also not emotionally accepting or being prepared to move on from a Klay Thompson. And that doesn't mean that it has to happen, but it goes back to the list of priorities and everything that kind of falls from there. Unfortunately for Klay, and some of it's timing, some of it is the fact that the Warriors were a better team at the time when they did the Draymond deal. They were a presumed top 8 team in the league. Now they're not. So that's not anybody's fault, and especially Klay's fault. But it's just kind of the reality of it is, like, I would love to see Klay Thompson back in a Warrior uniform, but that can't be the first item on the list. They got to figure out if they can get a trade done, or if they can ship around X, Y, and Z, or maybe make some kind of big splashy move and then see what's able to be offered to Klay Thompson after the fact there. Like, to me, it's not so much of a, what are your feelings toward him, or how much do you respect him, or how much do you value what he brought to the franchise, as, yes, you want to have Klay back, but that is not the first, second, third, or even fourth item on the checklist right now.
Yeah, it might be second or third. It's definitely not first. I think that's the part where I will agree with you.
Let me rephrase. It might be second or third, but you're looking at more than just one or two possibilities before you worry about Klay.
100%. No, there's no doubt. I mean, you are, and I think that's where he's the first player that's up to be paid, that's clearly declined in an era where the Warriors are hyper focused on maximizing the financials, because they no longer view themselves as they're currently constituted as a championship contender. Like, they know they're not a championship contender. They know Klay's clearly declining, even though he's somebody that's up to get paid. And so that changes the calculus on everything. And I think they know they have to check all these different boxes and turn over these specific rocks as to what, could be out there for them before they come back to Klay Thompson. Because here's the reality. And I've said this, and I'll continue to say it, and maybe we end up not saying it after tomorrow or going into the weekend, Sunday and Monday. But Klay Thompson alone, he can't be the first priority. He can't be. If the Warriors' number one priority was Klay Thompson above everything else, then it hamstrings their ability to be able to go out and get better. And Klay Thompson coming back alone does not make the Warriors better. It makes them maybe the same, but I don't even think it makes them the same, because how can you possibly expect Klay Thompson to be the same player next year that he was this year as he continues to be older? And then you couple that with the fact, Greg, that Klay Thompson potentially wanted a what I've already done for you kind of a contract. And that's where the whole thing, I think, just becomes completely untenable if you're the Warriors. So it's a difficult situation. I think there are some hard feelings and some personal feelings and some frustrations that have basically weighed in, that have led to this point where Klay may reportedly, per Anthony Slater, take an offer less of what the offer winds up being from the Warriors to be able to go elsewhere. I'll believe that when I see it. But that being said, and look, I'll be perfectly blunt. I think the Warriors are better for having Klay Thompson on the team next year. I want to be clear on that. But they have to go out and do at least one thing, if not two, maybe 2+, before they can bring Klay Thompson back. I'm sort of in the Bob Myers mode of, hey, you could go get Paul George and Klay, and it may not be enough. Okay, it may not be enough, but it at least gives you a fighting chance. So I think, like, I'm not one, as much as I don't think Klay should be the first priority, Greg, I'm also not one equally to say that Klay Thompson shouldn't be a priority at all, if that makes sense.
No, I absolutely would love to see Klay Thompson on the team next year, but as we've discussed since the second Steve Kerr had his exit interview on April 17th after the Sacramento loss, we brought this to our last regular season Just Dubs before we began the offseason. It has to be an option that Clay can come off the bench next year and play 25 minutes and not close a lot of games. So I do want to see him back, but that has to absolutely be an option depending on how the rest of the offseason shakes out.
Yeah, no, I think that's I think that's a big deal. There's no question. Looking at the final couple of picks here in the draft, Dylan Jones from Weber State has gone 26 to the Wizards. Minnesota's going to be up at 27, Denver at 28, Utah at 29. And then the Boston Celtics are going to pick at number 30, Warriors on the clock tomorrow at number 52. It's going to be interesting, Greg, to see how teams handle. And I read the report earlier today that there were some NBA teams that reached out to NFL teams to see how the NFL teams handle day one to day two. A little different. Again, day one to day two, you're still talking about some big time picks in the NFL that can really help shape your franchise in that second and third round from day one to day two, where day one's the first round. NBA a little bit different, but the NBA
the 49ers special.
Yeah, the NBA going through this in a different way here as they do the whole reset the board and look at your best player available on your board as you lead into day two, and the potential for that to lead to maybe some movement, I think, at the top of day two, because that's one thing I would not rule out tomorrow for the Warriors. I would not rule out the potential for the Warriors to look to move into the 30s from maybe 52 if there's somebody that maybe they had a top 20 grade on that all of a sudden is sitting there at 35 or something along those lines.
Yeah, well, just looking through some of the reports right now, Oklahoma City is actually sending 5 second-round picks to New York to get Dylan Jones.
There you
at
go.
Number 26. So pulling a little what the Warriors did with Gary Payton II back last year's trade deadline. And Minnesota selecting Illinois star guard Terrence Shannon at the number 27 pick.
Yeah, and look, I know we've had a few people chime in on the chat about Bronny James. I want no part of Bronny James being a Warrior. That is the definition of all hat, no cattle, right? Like that is the definition of way too much focus without any actual substance.
Would if you were like the Charlotte Hornets though, or just some team that's just kind of hanging around in the background, would you do it at like 40 just to
I'll say
shake
this.
things up?
And I don't even know if they have a second round pick because I haven't really followed it to that extent. Bronny James to the Sacramento Kings is like, that's like, I've got Sacramento Kings written all over Bronny James. Like they want the smoke. They want the attention. They want, people to be asked about it. Like, I don't know. Again, I know Phoenix has been linked to Bronny James even this afternoon. I don't even think the Kings have a second round pick, but yeah, I think Bronny James, like the franchise that falls in that category for me is the Sacramento franchise, Greg.
Yeah, that's fair. And you know it well. Like you grew up right in the heart of that. So
they would love the owner of that franchise would love to put everybody in the uncomfortable position of, let's talk about Bronny James because it gives us positive exposure. Bronny James being on our team as a second round pick will give us an extra couple of nationally televised games. Let's do it. And then it puts Mike Brown, who got his contract extension, in the awkward position of explaining nightly why Bronny James is a DNP coach's decision.
Yeah, that's I'm just accepting 55th pick.
I want no part.
Happening.
I want no part of that. I want no part of that if I'm the Warriors or the Kings for that matter. But if I'm the Warriors, and I wouldn't be surprised if Mike Brown had that put in his contract extension. No Bronny James and give me the bag.
Yeah. Well, Listen, we can get to some final topics here shortly. Just also want to remind everyone, if you're still with us after all this time, first of all, thank you. Great to be live again. Tomorrow will be radio live, 6 to 9, a little sports phone style. JD is going to be out at Harmonic. I'm going to be in the studio having beers in my own right. And we're going to be taking calls, right?
We are going to be taking calls at 808 KNBR. Looking forward to it tomorrow, 6 to 9. Yeah, looking forward to seeing Jimmy and Shay and Mike and Julia and Grace. Grace, I got hung up on Grace. I apologize. I got hung up on Grace early and couldn't remember her name earlier. I was like, and I got everybody, and I was like, Grace. I'm sorry, Grace. I apologize. And yeah, so to everybody at Harmonic Brewing, looking forward to seeing you. Yeah, G Finley going to be watching tomorrow. We appreciate that. Rebel to Sounds, No Cap, San Jose Jazz fan. Like, we are looking forward to continuing our partnership with Harmonic Brewing in Thrive City throughout the course of the offseason and the 2024-25. Need to slow down there, JD, season. So, yeah, appreciate everybody that will be chiming in there as well. And we'll see what happens with the Warriors tomorrow at number 52. Jason, did the Warriors get Bobby Portis? No, not as of yet. Not ruling it out, but not as of yet. That has been, to this point, the most significant Warriors rumor of the last 3-4 hours, is the one involving the Warriors being in talks with the Bucks on the potential to send Andrew Wiggins for Bobby Portis. But no, nothing reported as final at this point in time.
Yeah, and looks like just one more pick to be made tonight. We have Phoenix taking Ryan Dunn at number 28, and Utah selecting Isaiah Collier at number 29. Shams Charania tipping the picks and getting right in the TV broadcast, man.
Yeah, no, that's well, look, I'm all for that.
Everyone does it. Everyone does it.
I'm all for pick tipping. I have no problem with that. In fact, I know we were talking about this being the most underwhelming draft of both of our lifetimes. I also feel like, and maybe it's just circumstance, and I've loved the conversation. I've loved what everybody said. I feel like it's been, they switched from, hey, first and second round. We're going to do the first round tonight, second round tomorrow, as opposed to having the first and the second round, the whole draft tomorrow. Usually it would have been tomorrow. So the first round got moved up a day. The second round is the same day, but it's separated by a night of sleep for everyone. But I feel like this has been, among NBA first rounds that I can remember, the one that is just dragged on the longest. Like, I know it's not by number, but the 3-hour first round of this draft feels like it's gone about 10. If that, holy crap. Isaiah Collier of USC goes to the Utah Jazz here. I know you mentioned that, but Isaiah Collier, 29, USC, number to the Utah Jazz. The point guard with the Celtics officially on the clock. And I haven't been checking the tweets. Maybe the Celtics have actually already made their pick or traded out of their pick or whatever they intend to do.
Yeah, and just got one more. It was the wrong USC player, though. We got to wait all the way to 55 tomorrow. But I'll get off the Bronny talk.
No Bronny.
Yeah.
No Bronny.
Awesome, this was so cool to go live again and just kind of reconvene. I know I've been wanting to try to get some live podcasts going, but it's always trickier when we got different schedules, working various sports phones. You've done some Giants post games, so to be back talking hoops, doing it live is great. And even to the people that came into the chat and didn't say the nicest of things, I got a secret for you, JD, and I know you know this very well. When people complain about KNBR or the people on KNBR and they just want a little attention and they say they're done with it, they always come back.
Who's done with it? Come on. Everybody loves KNBR.
I've heard a lot of I'm done with KNBR in the last 6 months, and usually it doesn't happen.
No, it doesn't. Yeah, I said this. Well, you know what? I'm not going to say it. I'm not going to say it. I've always wondered, though, what a world is where Hayden Birdsong is more relevant than Klay Thompson. I've always wondered what that world would look like. And over the last couple of days, really 24 hours, I've gotten a little bit of a taste of what that world may look like. I don't want to live in that world, Greg. I don't. And thankfully, I don't think we're going to have to.
The good news is
no cap in San Jose Jazz fan. Hey, yeah, Hayden Birdsong. Big Hayden Birdsong start tonight. I'm going to watch that back, by the way, when we're off the air, because I think I'm in for Greg tomorrow, and we're going to be all over Hayden Birdsong tomorrow. But yeah, Giants up 4-3, bottom 5 over at Oracle Park. Bottom 5 at 8:13. Bottom 5 at 8:13. Did my phone not refresh? They're in the bottom of the 5th at 8:4. Where is that when I'm hosting post-game sports phone? Jesus. 2 hours and 30 minutes, and we're in the bottom of the 5th?
There could be some kind of delay or something.
For Christ's sake, that my phone cannot. That's got to be wrong.
Hold on.
That's got to be wrong.
And we have our final pick of the draft. While we're at it, Boston selected Baylor Shireman at number 30. So draft day number 1 is over. We'll be on to draft day 2, where the Warriors do have the 52nd overall pick. And maybe my gaucho, AJ Mitchell, finds his way into getting his name called.
Yeah, it could be your gaucho. We'll see if the Warriors have something cooking. And again, keep it locked on KNBR tomorrow, 6 a.m. Murph and Marcus. 10 a.m. Lund and myself, it looks like, sitting in for Greg Papa. Then the Giants are going to take on the Cubs. The second round of the draft is going to go on. And Adam Copes is going to be out at Harmonic Brewing tomorrow after the Giants game for Tolbert and Copes. And then I'm going to be out there with Copes and then hanging out for the 6 to 9 show, Sportsman KNBR, on a Thursday night. Our Just Dubs NBA draft special, wrapping things up. So good stuff. Yeah, San Jose Jazz fan. The pitch clock is broken. Any final?
It is the bottom of the 5th.
It is the bottom of the 5th. Yeah, no, my phone did update. It is the bottom of the 5th. Greg, final thoughts to you, my friend. I know we didn't get to all the Dunleavy. I know we didn't get to all the Warriors rumors, but we did talk at length, especially early, about Paul George. I'll say this. I think the Warriors should go for it, even if it means giving up Kuminga. Even if it means giving Paul George an extension. I do think the Warriors should go for it because it gives them their best chance to move forward with a shot to contend. And I think that's what the next 2 to 3 years are all about. You can't be worried about the next 4 to 5 years. You have to worry about the next 2 to 3 years and then let the chips fall where they may.
Yeah, my final thought really is that there is no perfect scenario for the Golden State Warriors when you have a ticking clock and trying to keep something that's been so great together still. You got to take a swing one direction or another. So whatever they do, we're going to talk about it. It's going to be great. I'll support the young players or I'll support the Paul George, whatever it may be. So excited to be back at it, 6 p.m. tomorrow. And if you're going to tune in, we'll be here on YouTube. But also, if you have the courage, give us a call.
Yeah, 808 KNBR, 415-808-5627, 6 until 9 tomorrow. For Greg Silver, I'm John Dickinson. 2 hours and 30 minutes in the books. That's 6 hours and 30 minutes for your boy on the day here before 8:30 at night. We'll talk to you tomorrow. I'll be with John Lund, likely at 10 a.m. from the patio at 58 Social, and then over at Harmonic Brewing in Thrive City at 6 to 9, KNBR, the sports leader. Good night.